we get a sampling of Peter's early preaching from Acts chapter 2, Psalm 16, and then we get a little bit of Peter again from the first epistle of Peter, chapter 1, and then we have the famous John 20 meeting of Jesus and doubting Thomas. Let's start with Acts chapter 2. Acts chapter 2 is, so always got to keep in mind, Acts was written by Luke, right? So it's almost considered to be like his second volume of his gospel. Now, that being said, a lot of what we get in Acts isn't so much an example of the person who's speaking as much as we are getting Luke. And Peter's preaching is no different. Now, in Acts chapter 2, it might sound familiar because that is the passage that has the that recounts the day of Pentecost, the one that happened the 50th day of Easter. Peter, remember, after the speaking in tongues thing happens, the miraculous communication event, then Peter stands up and starts to preach. Well, that sermon, the first part of that sermon is what we actually quote on Pentecost Sunday. There's a middle portion and then a later portion that we're going to read on the next two Sundays. So the portion that we're reading today is the middle portion, which comes just after the first portion that we will be hearing on Pentecost Sunday. And it starts in verse 14. But Peter, standing with the 11, raised his voice and addressed them. Luke is very clear to give us the count that it's only 11 standing with the 11, because he had already talked about the losing of Judas and the replacing of him with Matthias. And that was what happened right before the day of Pentecost. If you look at chapter 1, verse 26, it says, "And they cast lots for them, and the lot fell on Matthias, and he was added to the 11 apostles." So, yeah. So here we are reminded again when we're saying standing with the 11. Okay, yeah, so 12, back to 12. Then we skip to verse 22. Yes, verse 22. "You that are Israelites, listen to what I have to say." So remember, there were many people there from all over the diaspora, okay? The dispersed Jews had all returned to Israel for the celebration of the Feast of Pentecost, okay? And so that's what the town was full of, okay? "Listen to what I have to say. Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with deeds of power, wonders, and signs that God did through him among you." Now, if we just back up here. So Jesus of Nazareth, this historicizes this Jesus. It's like this Jesus is not something that we made up. He is actually from someplace. You could actually point to it. He's not a figment of our imagination. A man attested to you by God with deeds of power. Now, it was strongly believed in those days that if you were doing those kinds of things that Jesus was doing, these weren't like magic tricks, okay? These were actually deeds of power. Notice that's the expression, that's the gospel expression that we like to call miracles, right? Wonders and signs, okay? Deeds of power, wonders and signs. Now, there's no there's no, see, back then they didn't have this concept of scientific or scientific proof or historicity or, empirical evidence for. They saw everything as, there was nothing as impossible in terms of what you could actually see. So we, in this day and age, we've divided it into the, there's what's natural and then there's supernatural. And if it's supernatural, that means it's a miracle, right? But they didn't have that distinction in the days of the early church, right? Attested to you by God with deeds of power. It's basically saying, you saw everything he did. There's no mystery to what he did. That was not an illusion, okay? And that God did through him among you, okay? That's they're familiar with the fact that this Jesus was not some interloper from another religion or a non-Israelite, a non-Jewish person. He was Jewish, as you yourselves know. Okay, so he's all stating this like there's no mystery to what you saw happen with this man, but I'm about to tell you why this guy was different. Okay. This man, verse 23, handed over to you according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. Now, notice handed over. The preaching of the early church was convinced early on that what happened to Jesus, was it tragic? Yeah. Was it something that Jesus deserved? No, but it's very, very clear that the early church quickly came to grips with the fact that that Jesus being handed over, that this grave injustice, this this wrong on so many levels, kind of a thing, that God knew what God was doing through it, and the experience of the early church, of having the forgiveness and the eternal hope and the gift of faith, they just couldn't deny the fact that that didn't just happen by accident. That's not something we created. That's not something we made up. That's not something, that's not some silver lining of a cloud. No. It is indeed the definite plan and foreknowledge of God. Yeah, that's why he's saying it like this. You crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law. So it says by the hands of those outside the law. Romans were not of the law of Moses, so therefore that's why they're called outside the law, right? He's when he says you crucified and killed. By the hands, so it's got to remember, Peter was a Jewish person too. Jesus was a Jewish person too, and he's talking to all Jewish people, and he doesn't say we, no, he says you, because he's referring to the displaced masses who have forever or eternally looked for their hope in for the hope of the Messiah, but yet in their economy, he had not come. Well, you crucified and killed by the hands of those outside the law meant that there was a non-recognition of his messianic personhood and Son of God status, right? But God raised him up, having freed him from death, because it was impossible for him to be held in its power. So notice the confession that we hear here is that Jesus didn't rise up on his own. God raised him up, right? Having freed him from death. So to be free from death means that death no longer has any control. That's what resurrection is. Resurrection means that there's no more death. Death is gone. Death is no longer a purveyor of the reason why we do things. We no longer fear death. And when we're not fearing death, the sky's the limit, so to speak. Having freed him from death, because it was impossible for him to be held in its power. Yeah, the author of life, the Son of God, the creator of the universe, right? The one who invented life. How could death hold it? Death is just it's just a thing. It's just one of those little, it's like, oh yeah, well, you got to go through it, but it's not terminal. Yeah, death isn't terminal. How do you like that? Good message, huh? For David says, according to him, for David says concerning him. Now, whenever we see our gospel writers quoting something from the Psalms, it's always as David said, okay? Just so you know, this doesn't mean David wrote it. It just means that that's the tradition that they were purveying, right? So this quote that we have in verses 25, 26, 27, 28, let's see, that comes from Psalm 16, and Psalm 16, oh, guess what? That's what our psalm is for today, so we'll read that soon. I saw the Lord always before me, for he is at my right hand, so that I will not be shaken. Therefore my heart was glad, and my tongue rejoiced. Moreover, my flesh will live in hope. For you will not abandon my soul to Hades, or let your Holy One experience corruption. Yeah, notice this expression. This is one of the things that had the early church see in the resurrection of Jesus, that there was a descent to, and in the old version of the Apostles' Creed, descend to hell. And this is where this is the seedbed for that, okay? Or let your Holy One experience corruption. By the way, they're not, Hades is not hell in the terms of the psalmist, but we'll get to that when we talk about the psalm. You have made known to me the ways of life, and you will make me full of gladness with your presence. Many of the Psalms were interpreted to be messianic in nature, okay? Anytime there's talk of, being at the right hand, the Lord always before me, oh yes, my heart is so glad, I'm rejoicing, I'm just so happy with what God has done with me. A lot of this stuff is read messianically, okay, as referring to the Messiah. Fellow Israelites, so now we get back to Peter's sermon, verse 29. I may say to you confidently of your ancestor David that he both died and was buried. The reason why he's mentioning this is because a lot of people believe that the Psalms that came from David's hand meant that David was the Messiah, okay, in that he's the original Messiah, small m, the anointed, right? It was believed that the true Messiah would be one who had these same characteristics, right? I may say to you confidently of your ancestor David that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is still with us to this day. Died and buried. This is that same trope that you see with regard to Jesus, right? The cycle of his resurrection. Since he was a prophet, referring to David, and that is the take on the early church, from the early church on who David was. Since he was a prophet, he knew that God had sworn with an oath to him that he would put one of his descendants on his throne. Yes, okay, that's the way the messianic belief was believed, that it would be a descendant of David. Foreseeing this, David spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah. So now he's going to quote another psalm. Now this is verse 31, and this is where our reading will end. But the Messiah, there was this assumption that it would come from David. What was a verse? I think it's Psalm 132. There's a psalm there's a psalm. He was not abandoned to Hades. No, oh no. Well, this is the same quote back from Psalm 16. I'm sorry. He was. Yeah. Foreseeing this, verse 31, David spoke of the resurrection of the Messiah, saying, "He was not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh experience corruption." That is his thing he plays. The verse he replays from verse 16. Or from Psalm 16 that he quoted back in verse 27, right? Saying that again as like that, he points to that and said, that's what's referring to the resurrection of the Messiah. Well, here's his point with all of this. This Jesus, last verse, this Jesus, God raised up, and of that, all of us are witnesses. This is the testimony of the early church that this is a very good example of the early kerygma, which is the Greek word for preaching, but it's a message it's that basic nut of communication that the early church was clinging to, that it would put out there in all of their sermons and what have you. Now, we'll get more of that in the weeks to come. But let's go to Psalm 16. Psalm 16 is that psalm that is quoted by Luke in Acts and coming out of Peter's mouth. Look at this. Protect me, O God, for I take refuge in you. I have said to the Lord, you are my Lord, my good above all other. Do you see how the early church could, if you thought of David as writing these psalms, that this could be a sentiment that would be consonant with David's thoughts, right? Especially if they thought that David was conscious of his anointedship and all of that, right? Verse 2, all my delight is upon the godly that are in the land, upon those who are noble among the people. But those who run after other gods shall have their troubles multiplied. Their libations of blood I will not offer, nor take the names of their gods upon my lips. O Lord, you are my portion and cup. It is you who uphold my lot. My boundaries enclose a pleasant land. Indeed, I have a goodly heritage. I will bless the Lord who gives me counsel. My heart teaches me night after night. I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is my right hand, I shall not fall. This is something we've seen. This is what we saw quoted in Acts chapter 2. My heart, therefore, is glad, and my spirit rejoices. My body also shall rest in hope, for you will not abandon me to the grave, nor let your Holy One see the pit. See, that's the idea of what we get translated as, you will not abandon my soul to Hades or let your Holy One experience corruption. That's what we get in the Acts translation is the quoting of the Greek version of the Old Testament. That's the reason why the wording doesn't match up exactly. You will show me the path of life. In your presence there is fullness of joy, and in your right hand are pleasures forevermore. Not exactly the same translation we get. Psalm 16 probably wasn't originally written by David. It probably wasn't him thinking of his offspring and his messiahship, small m, and his lineage. It's probably more written by somebody who is seeking protection from God in troubled times, like we have a lot of in the Psalms, right? But it definitely took on a messianic tone with the early church. All right. Now, 1 Peter 1, 3 through 9. I'm trying to beat this shadow. See this shadow? This thing is as the sun comes. It moves it, or the sun or the the Earth rotation, whatever it is. Anyway, it's going to get closer and closer to my face, and I want to get done with it before it wipes me out. So there you go. 1 Peter 1, 3 through 9. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. By his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Christ from the dead. See how we got a little bit of Peter's sermon there, and this probably is very likely more authentically Peter than what we had in Acts. Okay, although it's similar, right, in terms of tone and message, but the wording is a little different, right? Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. By his great mercy, he has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, and undefading, kept in heaven for you, who are being protected by the power of God through faith for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. Yeah, the gift of Easter is faith. I think I had a sermon once for Christmas. It was like the gift of Christmas is hope. The gift of Easter is faith. Yeah. In this you rejoice, even if now for a little while you have had to suffer various trials, so that the genuineness of your faith, being more precious than gold, that though perishable is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed. There was a lot of testing going on during this time that we find the first epistle of Peter written, and it appears that one of the purposes of the letter is to encourage people who are experiencing, starting to experience some sort of persecution. That's why he's talking about if for a little while you have had to suffer various trials. It was believed that this was just the part and parcel, like, oh, that's so sad. No, it's like, no, this is the way it has to be in order for you to prove your true mettle. Yeah, indeed. Verse 8, although you have not seen him, get it? So part of the thing of the early church was, hey, all we know is what we've heard people say. Well, look at this. Although you have not seen him, yeah, that's what it's referring to. You love him. And even though you do not see him now, you believe in him and rejoice with an indescribable and glorious joy, for you are receiving the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Oh, isn't that a great line? This, in the context of our epistle writer, the experiencing of persecution, of being going through suffering various trials, as it says, this is all about this is just a small thing to go through with regard to the experiencing of faith, because there's an indescribable and glorious joy. Okay, there's so much more on the other side of this bad time that when we do get to it, you'll look back on it and think, that was nothing. Yeah, exactly. This is a part, again, this is an example of how the resurrection and ascension of Christ after the death and burial, how it uplifted and gave people courage to be those witnesses for God and for his Christ. Now, let's go to the gospel passage. We get John chapter 20, verses 19 to 31. Now, last Sunday, on Easter Sunday, we read the first part of chapter 20, which was Jesus' appearance to Mary Magdalene in the garden. That was where the tomb was, right? Well, now we get something that happens on the evening of that day. Verse 19, as it says, John chapter 20, verses 19 to the end of the chapter. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors of the house where the disciples had met were locked for fear of the Jews. Now, the Jews is an expression that we have all the way through John, which is, it's not intended to be anti-Semitic or paint the Jews as bad people, because after all, Jesus was Jew, all of the apostles were Jews. But the Jews, they were this the foil in John for those for a counter opposing force to what God was doing. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, one of the contexts of the Gospel of John is a time of persecution, not persecution by the Romans, but persecution by their own people in their own synagogues, where like, oh, if you believe in Jesus, then you got to go, that kind of a thing. And so there was a little bit of a clash going on in the synagogues between those who believed in Jesus and those who did not. Okay, Jesus came and stood among them. Notice, all we're being told is that the doors were locked. The house where they had met were locked. Okay, the doors of the house were were locked, and Jesus came and stood among them. We're not told how. We're just saying it's. All we're being told is that he did. All right. Peace be with you, he says to them. Now we know this as that greeting that we share with one another right after the absolution of sin in our service, right? Well, I encourage you to think of it as an Easter greeting. After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. We're not told what happened to the hands previous to this. We are told something about the side with regard to the sword and the spear that pierced it, and water and blood came out. Yeah. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. That was for them like proof. It's interesting that there was apparently you would think there would be something more distinguishing, right? Like the face. No. The voice? No. It wasn't for, it was the voice for Mary Magdalene, but it wasn't the voice here. It was the showing, which is interesting, because the narrative here is dealing with that which we see with our eyes, right? But why didn't they recognize his face? Yeah, right? Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. Didn't get it the first time, here we go again. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. This is the great sending, the great commissioning of the Johannine Gospel, right? This is it's like just as I am one with the Father, you are one with me. And you and the Father, and it's like we're all in this together. We're all the same now. Is basically this: as the Father sent me, so I send you. We could go back through all of the things that Jesus said in the Gospel of John, where he talks about the Son and the Father and how they exist between each other, and replace in that a relationship between Jesus and the church, Jesus and his disciples. You would come up with a great example of who the church is supposed to be in the world. Verse 22. When he had said this, I'm sorry, I got something going on right here. Okay. When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, breathe. Remember the breathe. Anytime you're breathing, that's spirit, that's life. Got it? Wind, right? What is it that we have had with on the day of Pentecost? We had that wind, right? That spirit that blew, and it raised all kinds of a ruckus, and it enabled them to communicate in languages that they did not know, but yet people could understand with their ears, right? Well, here is the same kind of thing happening Only this is John's version of the giving of the Spirit. When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, get this, receive the Holy Spirit. Pentecost, right? Yeah, this is the Johannine Pentecost. Verse 23, if you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained. He is basically telling them that they have the same authority that he had, okay? But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we have seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe. Remember, okay, by the way, this is the only time we see any reference to nail prints in Jesus' hands in all of the Gospels. This is the only time. Yeah, the only time is when we hear Thomas say this. So, because when the crucifixion is narrated in all of the Gospels, we don't get anything about hands and nails, nothing. But here we do, right? This is, Thomas is an example of many people's experience in the early church, which was, really, I've got to go by what you're telling me and not by, I don't get to see. That's not fair. I should get to see. And so Thomas is taking on that role. So don't be hard on Thomas. Thomas is good. Thomas is a good guy. He speaks up for all the people many times, a few times in the gospel. One of which is when he says to Jesus, well, let us go so we can go die with you. Thomas has got some great things to he says. He is an example of the early church. And if you think about it, us as well, because we don't see, but he says, yeah. Although the doors were shut, a week later, so he says, unless I see him and feel it, I won't believe, right? A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them, although the doors were shut. Notice, not locked, shut. So Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. So this is the third time we've had him say that peace be with you type thing, right? Then he said to Thomas, yeah, he's actually there, put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe. Now, we're not told that Thomas actually does this. We're just seeing Jesus as offering that. And apparently, Thomas saw what he wanted to see. We're not told that he actually did touch. It says, Thomas answered him, my Lord and my God. Yeah, this is the basic confession of the early church, that who Jesus is the Son who manifests God. Therefore, he is the Lord. He is God because he manifested him in the flesh. In the Semitic mindset, this is one and the same, okay? Jesus said to him, have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe. Yeah, this is what the whole purpose of John's gospel is, as we are going to be told in the next two verses. Thomas's experience is the experience of the church, and it's what gives it that gas, that pushing on the accelerator. Like we're going on into the future because it's going to have to continue, but for on the witness of the previous people, because there's not going to be any more appearances. That's a limited time offer. It's going to be all based on testimony from here on out. Yeah. Now, yeah, isn't that wonderful? That's who we are. That's what creates the church. That's who we exist as, people who witness, people who are testifying to a reality that others haven't, that has been seen, but we don't get to see. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. Some people take this to mean that means that there was an original form of John that was just a book of signs, and that this was the last of those signs. Possibly, maybe. But this is probably the original ending of John's gospel, though. But these are written, right? These signs, these are written so that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. Through believing, through faith. Chapter 21 then is like an appendix. So this is like the original ending of John's gospel, and it tells us everything we need to know about why gospels are written. They are intended to invoke belief. And faith is that gift of the resurrection, and that you have life in his name, that there's nothing else required. This is it. This is, when you find this, you found everything. Gosh, I could riff a lot about that forever and ever. But that's all I've got time for. I don't want to let this shadow go any farther. Until next time, peace.